Today I'm walking on history, quite literally. This unassuming little street was once the place of a battleground. Hi, I'm Justine, the nerdy half of the Breakaway Bravehearts, and today I'm in Maidstone, a beautiful Kentish city, only an hour's train ride from London, where I was surprised to find England's political history hidden in the streets of ordinary life. While I've been in England, I've spent a lot of time in castles and learnt a lot about the kings and queens and the royalty that have shaped England's history. But today I'm looking at the little people, the ordinary folk in the ordinary towns, and how they have shaped England's political future. I'm walking up Gabriel's Hill in Maidstone on a sunny day in May, where most people are doing their shopping, getting their nails done, or enjoying a coffee. But in June 1648, on a very rainy day, 300 royalists were killed fighting their way up this hill. The battle for Gabriel's Hill wasn't just a local skirmish, it was part of a full-on civil war that was shaking up what England thought about political power, individual rights, and the place of monarchy. But to find out why this little Kentish town played such a significant role, we need to step back a little bit. We're stepping back to the 14th century, where Maidstone was a typical medieval market town. Small, busy, and a little smelly. Most people lived ordinary lives in ordinary homes and rarely travelled outside of the town. Right up until 1381, where something quite extraordinary happened. Life in this growing market town was heavily shaped by the influence of the church, particularly the Archbishop of Canterbury, who acted as its feudal lord, governing through his courts, with little say from ordinary townsfolk. After the devastation of the Black Death, surviving peasants found themselves in high demand, but attempts by the ruling classes to freeze wages and enforce old feudal obligations led to growing frustration. New radical voices challenging traditional authority and calling for a more equal and just society found ready ears in towns like Maidstone. On June the 5th, 1381, Maidstone had a rather important and infamous visitor. Wat Tyler and his band of rebels were marching on their way to storm the Tower of London, but they stopped off in Maidstone to pick somebody up. Wat Tyler was a tradesman, probably a roof tiler, but he had a reputation for leadership. He wasn't poor, but he was angry. The reason? The poll tax. The people of England have a long history of paying taxes to fund the monarchy's ambitions, but the poll tax was different. It was a flat rate. That meant everyone had to pay the same, no matter their income. So of course the poor got hit the hardest. Wat Tyler and his group had had enough, and they were here in Maidstone to pick up somebody who was joining their cause. They were here to collect John Ball, imprisoned in the Archbishop's prison for preaching rebellious sermons. John Ball was a priest who had long been preaching outside of the church walls about the rights of individuals. His sermons seemed to question the entire social order. In one he said, "When Adam delved and Eve span, who then was the gentleman?" That's a radical way of saying no one is born to rule. And it's treason. And that's exactly in line with Wat Tyler's ideals. As the Peasants Revolt gathered momentum, Tyler and his band did manage to release Ball from prison, and he added his voice to their cause. Together, Tyler and Ball were voicing a dangerous idea. England needs to change. And for a little while, it looked like they might be successful. Tyler led his team to London, and there they met with King Richard II. But negotiations got tense, and Wat Tyler was killed. Richard II did front up to the crowd, and he promised reforms, but these were quickly revoked. The rebellion just lost momentum with the death of Wat Tyler. Ball fled the country, but he too was captured and executed for treason. In the years that followed the revolt, the church moved to reassert its authority. Here at All Saints Church, an impressive building then and now, Archbishop Courtney laid stone, not just for worship, but for control. Next door at the college, clergy were trained to promote obedience, hierarchy, and divine order. This wasn't just about faith, it was about who held power. But while sermons of obedience were echoing these halls, down at the marketplace, life was a little different. The marketplaces were full. People made fun of the rich. During the Tudor period, ruling England seemed to be like a game of musical chairs. Monarchs came and went in quick succession. Each new monarch brought a new religious order, swapping Catholic for Protestant and back again, forcing ordinary people to constantly adapt their beliefs, practices, and loyalties. The people of Maidstone lived under a heavy hand, but they remembered what rebellion felt like. And while they had limited political power, there was a growing class of tradesmen and merchants who were starting to assert more influence. By the 1500s, it was Maidstone's guilds that were shaping local life. Behind me is the Corpus Christi Hall, which was the centre for one of the most important guilds in the region. It was kind of a mix of trade union, religious brotherhood, and a kind of mutual aid society. If you were a butcher, a brewer, or a weaver, you likely were a member here. This is where they met to make decisions, essentially their seat of power. But then everything changed with the Reformation. Under Edward VI, these halls were shut down under suspicion of being too Catholic, too independent. And in 1547, Corpus Christi was dissolved and all its assets seized. For ordinary Maidstonians, that meant more than just the loss of a club. That meant the loss of funeral funds, legal help, community support. It was the dismantling of a social infrastructure and a reminder that power was shifting fast. The pace of religious change, the loss of traditional institutions, and the mounting anxiety over foreign influence created a sense that the country, and towns like Maidstone, were being reshaped without the consent of the people. So it wasn't very surprising when Maidstone was swept into rebellion again. Thomas Wyatt led his rebels through here, gathering farmers, blacksmiths, ordinary folk as he went. They were marching against Queen Mary's plan to marry Philip of Spain, and their concern wasn't just religious, it was political. They didn't want to be a satellite of Catholic Spain. Hundreds from Maidstone gathered together and the town became a hub of resistance. But the rebellion was short-lived and punishment was swift. Mary revoked Maidstone's royal charter, cutting back its rights and representation. The message was clear: mess with the crown and the town will pay. And the consequences didn't stop there. On this busy road in 1557, 7 Protestants were burned at the stake for refusing to go back to Catholic worship. Their execution was grim. It was meant to silence people into submission. But the victims, like local labourer Alan of Martyrs, became martyrs. Their stories spread quickly, and within just a generation, Protestants were back in power. And the ordinary people of Maidstone were continuing to shape that identity. By the 1600s, this ordinary-looking street was the home to 2 major political figures. The first was Andrew Broughton, Maidstone's town clerk. He signed the death warrant for Charles I. That act didn't come out of nowhere. By the early 1600s, England had developed a parliamentary system alongside its monarchy, but things weren't going so well. Civil war broke out because of deep conflicts over how the country should be governed. After the king was beheaded, England became a republic, briefly, under Oliver Cromwell. It was a radical political movement. For ordinary people, it meant living under a government without a monarch for the first time, though how much say everyday citizens actually had was still extremely limited. The Battle of Maidstone took place here on the 1st of June 1648 during the Second English Civil War. Royalist forces, largely Kentish volunteers, had occupied the town. in defiance of the Parliament. Fighting was fierce, street by street, and the Royalists made their final stand here in Gabriel's Hill. In the torrential rain, after hand-to-hand combat, 300 Royalists were killed and 1,300 captured and imprisoned. It was one of the most intense urban battles of the war and solidified Parliament's control over Kent. After Cromwell's death and a period of political chaos, many longed for stability, and this led back to the restoration of the monarchy in 1660. England didn't go back to the old ways, though. Instead, it moved towards becoming a constitutional monarchy, where the monarch ruled within limits set by law and Parliament held the real power. A system that still shapes British politics today. Back at All Saints Church, I found someone with a very familiar name, but an unexpected link between Maidstone and international political revolution. In here, you'll find a plaque commemorating Lawrence Washington, who was buried here in 1666. Notice the familiar family crest? Lawrence Washington moved to Maidstone in 1601. He was a lawyer and a justice of the peace, and he became one of the town's 2 members of Parliament. The family crest at the top with 2 stars and 3 stripes is the oldest one found here in England, and it was here long before this symbol was seen in America. Lawrence was the 4 times great uncle of George Washington, first President of the United States. It's a quiet but powerful link between a small town and big ideas about liberty and revolution. The question of who governs and why didn't stay here. It moved across oceans. A century later, William Hazlitt was born just down the road here, and he went on to be one of England's major political voices, fighting for democracy, political rights, freedom of speech. Hazlitt's fierce commitment to individual liberty and opposition to oppression is captured in his own words: a hatred of tyranny and a contempt for its tools. His writings challenged the status quo and inspired generations to question authority and fight for greater freedom. By the 18th century, Maidstone had a new symbol, a grand Georgian town hall. It symbolised order, civic pride, and the stability of power. And it had a jail inside it to make sure it stayed that way. Apparently there's still graffiti on the jail walls of the political prisoners, leaving names, dates and slogans to make sure their voices are heard. Through the 19th and 20th centuries, those voices grew louder. Maidstone's people began to demand more from their political system. The right to vote expanded, first to working class men and then to women. Trade unions, suffragettes and reformers turned protest into policy, and a slow shift towards a more inclusive democracy. Maidstone is a great reminder that change isn't made only in palaces and parliaments. It's made in towns like this, by ordinary people choosing to speak out. So we're back where we started at Gabriel's Hill, the site of a battle for political freedom. And while eventually that was gained, the story has not yet finished. Today the monarchy no longer governs, but it still holds significant symbolic and financial influence. Just yesterday it was announced that the sovereign grant, that's the taxpayers' money that supports the monarchy, is set to rise again from £86 million to £132 million. Most of that will be spent on refurbishing Buckingham Palace. Public opinion is starting to shift, especially in the younger generation. A 2024 survey said that only 54% of Britain's population believe it's important to maintain the monarchy. So I guess that means Maidstone's population is split in 2. It will be interesting to see how this little city is going to continue to influence political life in their country. I've loved this tour of Maidstone, learning how ordinary people have shaped a country's political life. If you want to learn more about Maidstone, check out our other video linked above, which will give you travel tips and tricks along the way. And while you're there, don't forget to hit subscribe. like and share with someone else. I have no idea where I'm headed to next. Hopefully Daryl will be joining me when I do get there, and hopefully you'll join me too. Until then, happy travels everyone.